Hello. How are you? Are you good? Yes, I'm talking to you. Yeah, you. Okay. Welcome back. As you know, last week I talked about the differences between the Attitude Era and the PG Era. I said there was a second part to this, and there is. Now before I get started, there are a lot of things I'd really like to talk about, and I will be talking about in the coming weeks. So this will give you a heads up to what's on the agenda. One, I'd like to talk about Edge's career. I liked Edge, I'm a fan of Edge, and would like to do a salute to Edge. He is already on the WWE alumni page, so I am beginning to believe he is actually retiring. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the WWF pretty much writing out Chris Benoit in their history. I'd like to talk about that, because that just pisses me off. There are other things I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about TNA. But I don't watch it because it's crap anymore. Another thing I'd like to do is WWE All-Stars, the new WWE video game review. That will come as soon as I can get my hands on the video game. I don't want to buy it because it looks like crap. So I'm trying to rent it and I'm waiting to get my hands on it. Okay? So that gives you an idea of what's coming in the coming weeks. Another thing I'd like to talk about is how WWF has pretty much buried the Miz's championship reign. And as usual, we will answer questions from the audience starting this video. The only question we've got is from We've Got No Time to Lose. I don't know who he is. He asked me, what are you smoking? I'm smoking Cheyenne full flavored little cigars. It's the same thing I always smoke. There are hundreds just because they only come in hundreds. Same thing I always smoke. So that should answer your question. Try them, they're good. They're a lot smoother than Smoker's Choice little cigars, which are cheaper. And they're not as strong as Winchester little cigars, which are really strong. So they're pretty good. So now for the second part. What I'd like to talk about in this part is the feuds of the Attitude Era versus the feuds of the PG Era, and the wrestling. Not the wrestling, the wrestlers. Pretty much their characters, not the actual wrestler person. Their characters. Compared to the characters of the Attitude Era. Because there is a difference, even though it's only slight. The top superstars, or wrestlers of the Attitude Era, were Vince McMahon, who wasn't a wrestler, he was an on-screen character who wrestled occasionally. He was the top heel of the Attitude Era. The Undertaker, who was the top heel, one of the top heels of the Attitude Era, and then he became a face in late Attitude Era. He led the Ministry. Kane, who was one of the top heels of the Attitude Era, who later became a face. Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was the face of the Attitude Era. He was the face of the WWF in that era. He was pretty much the star of the WWF. Shawn Michaels for a while as a wrestler, and for a while as an on-screen character, but he left, and he wasn't around for that long, maybe a year. The Rock, who was the top heel and became one of the top faces of the Attitude Era. Mankind, who was a face during almost the entire Attitude Era. He was a heel to begin with, and then he was a face. Now, something you'll notice, now there's Triple H, who was, of course, the top heel of the Attitude Era and was pretty much always a heel. Well, he wasn't a heel with DX, but something you'll notice is these guys are top heels slash faces. One, the lines were blurred during the Attitude Era, and that was something that was really inventive. It was pretty much, yeah, some people would cheat, and you were supposed to root against them, and some people wouldn't. But the faces sometimes cheated and were assholes. I mean, The Rock was always this cocky, arrogant kind of ass, even when he was a face. Stone Cold was always Stone Cold. He always flipped you the bird. He always drank beer. He always told people to shut up. It was kind of blurred who the heels and who the faces were. You were kind of given the choice to root for whoever you wanted to root for. You wanted to root for Vince McMahon, you could root for Vince McMahon, though he was clearly supposed to be the heel. But it wasn't shoved down our throat that they were the heel. Sometimes the heel would do face things, sometimes the face would do heel things. That's a big difference compared to now when it's clear cut. The heels are the heels, the faces are the faces. These are who you're supposed to root for, this is who you're supposed to root against. You've lost the edginess, you've lost the in-between, the gray area. In the Attitude Era, there was a lot of gray characters who you could root for, you could root against, it didn't matter. This is much more clear-cut. That the faces are always the faces and the heels are always the heels. Also in the Attitude Era, with stables, this is something I really loved about stables and non-stables and tag teams and such. All because you were a heel in the Attitude Era, you weren't friends with all the heels. You could be a heel in the Attitude Era and an enemy of another heel. Or you could be a face in the Attitude Era and an enemy of another face. It goes back to that gray area where you could do pretty much whatever you wanted. If you were a heel or you were a face, you could face another face or you could face another heel. And you weren't friends with all the heels. I mean, if you were a heel and another heel wasn't in your stable or your tag team, he probably wouldn't come out to save you. Or if you were a face and another face wasn't in your tag team or stable, they probably wouldn't come out and save you. Unlike now where the heels pretty much support the other heels and the faces pretty much support the other faces. I don't like that. I think all because if they're not in the stable or the tag team, they probably shouldn't be friends with them. They probably wouldn't be friends with them. All because they're heel or face. And the Attitude Era realized that. It was back to my main point of this is realism. The Attitude Era had realism. The characters were characters, but they were like real people. Stone Cold was like the beer-swilling rebel, badass, anti-authority. I mean, we've all worked with a person like this who works for the place, but they're like anti-authority. Rock was the cocky, arrogant young guy who you've worked with. Mankind was this older guy who'd been doing it for 20 years but still loved doing it. Triple H was this young guy who hated, who secretly wanted to be in charge. The Attitude Era was when The Undertaker became less of a demon and more of a person. Kane was this scarred, insane individual who just wanted to cause destruction. Okay, he really wasn't that realistic, but the rest of them were realistic. Now we got Cena. I've never met anyone like Cena's character in real life. I've met the Stone Colds, I've met the Rocks, I've met the Mankinds, I've met the Triple H's, I've met the Undertaker, people who are obsessed with the dark side. I've met the Vince McMahons, you know, the asshole boss you work for. I've never met the Cena, the young guy who's really not that young, and has been on top and still enjoys being on top. And I'm not even sure what Cena's character is. He was a rapper, now he's not a rapper. He's just like a wrestler. He's like the leader of the young people, and it doesn't... The character isn't realistic. And I've never met the Randy Orton, you know, the young guy who's still kind of a badass, but not really a badass. Because he doesn't want to be labeled as a badass, so he's not really a badass, but he acts like a badass. But it's just, there's no realism now. I mean, it's not cartoony. Well, kind of is. Cartoony and over the top. Back in the Attitude Era, it was drenched in realism. You met these people. And now it's not really drenched in realism. You've never met a John Cena in real life. You've never met a Randy Orton in real life. I've met a giant in real life, but he really wasn't a giant. He was actually like 6'6". But anyways, now it's kind of over the top and cartoony, and that's one of the big differences. And those are two of my complaints about this era compared to the Attitude Era, is the gray area wrestlers where you could root for whoever you wanted to root for in the Attitude Era, compared to the PG era where they tell you who you root for and who you root against, and they ignore you if they get rooted against and stuff. In the Attitude Era, if someone started getting booed on a regular basis, like The Rock did when he first came in, they turned him heel. And then he started getting cheered and they turned him face. Triple H was getting booed, and so they turned him heel. And then they turned him face. They listened to the fans back in the Attitude Era. If fans booed somebody, they'd turn them heel. If fans cheered somebody, Stone Cold is a great example of this. He was a heel, and the fans would cheer the hell out of him. And so they turned him face. And they don't do that now. I mean, just look at John Cena, who's getting booed on a regular basis. And he's still a face. Or The Miz, who's getting cheered, and he's still a heel. Now, they do listen once in a while, like with Edge, who came back, and he was supposed to be a heel, and the fans just cheered the hell out of him. So they turned him face, but they kept him as a heelish tactic. Which is one of the reasons I really miss Edge. But other than that, it's very clear-cut. The Attitude Era wasn't. As for the top feuds of the Attitude Era, they really didn't last that long. The longest lasting feud was really the Stone Cold Vince McMahon feud of the Attitude Era. That really defined the Attitude Era. And that only lasted a year and a half. And then it ended, then it kind of started again, and it only lasted for like a month then. And that's when Vince revealed to be the ultimate, the greater power, or whatever it was called. And then Stone Cold got rid of him. It was kind of the end of the feud. And then you had The Rock Triple H, which was underlying feud for most of the time during the Attitude Era. But it was only the main feud once in a while. Feuds only lasted 3 or 4 pay-per-views. Now feuds will last 6 months minimum. Randy Orton versus John Cena lasted, what, 3 years? Okay, maybe not 3 years, but until they turned Randy Orton face, it was going on. They'd leave and then they'd come back to it, and in total it's taken up like a year and a half or 2 years of this. And it just, the feuds last longer, so they get dull and they get boring. I mean, look at the Rock Cena feud. It should have ended at WrestleMania. But instead they're making it last a whole year. Or over a year. And you can't do that. Plus, as I said, they changed them. A face wouldn't stay a face for a long time during the Attitude Era. And a heel wouldn't stay heel for a long time. Triple H, when the Attitude Era started, was a heel. Then with DX versus the Corporation, he became a face. Then he joined the Corporation and he became a heel again. Then he left the Corporation and he became a face again. Then he married Stephanie McMahon and took over the company and he became a heel again. That's like 6 changes over a 3-year period. The Rock started out a heel and then he became a face. Well, he started out a heel in the Attitude Era when it started in 1997, and he ran a heel all the way till I think he left the Corporation in 1999. 1999 or 2000, whenever the Corporation disbanded, that's when he finally became a face. And he stayed a face. Stone Cold was the only one who was a face the whole time in the Attitude Era. Mankind started out a heel, and he was a heel till Vince pretty much kicked him out of the Corporation, and then he became a face. But The Undertaker started out as a face, then he became a heel, then when he came back he became a face again. Kane started out as a heel, then he joined up with the corporate ministry and he stayed a heel, then he got kicked out of there and became a face, and he stayed a face. There were changes. I mean, that's the biggest difference. They changed it up. They switched it around. Now, whoever is a heel stays a heel, and whoever is a face stays a face, except for Randy Orton, who became a face from a heel, CM Punk, who became a heel from a face, and there's another one, R-Truth right now, who's becoming a heel. And John Morrison went from, John Morrison, yeah, he went from a heel to a face. Those are pretty much the only changes in the Attitude Era, except for Edge. Or the PG Era, except for Edge. It's just, those are the things missing, is shorter feuds lasting maybe 3 or 4 pay-per-views instead of lasting 6 months. I mean, the feud between CM Punk and Randy Orton, it's going to last 6 months. The Realism, the Attitude Era was very realistic. You knew people. You knew the characters. It's not that they were characters. They were actually real people. And that's what made that great. And you don't have that. Now they're like characters. They're broadly drawn characters, but they're characters. You don't know people like them. And what was the other thing I was talking about? The feuds. The feuds were shorter, but I already mentioned that. The gray area, which is the characters, well, that's pretty much it with the Attitude Era. As I said, that's what made the Attitude Era great, was it was realistic. It had the gray characters, and it had short feuds, so it kept you entertained. You'd watch it for a feud, and then all of a sudden the feud would change up, and this guy would go feud with somebody else, and this guy would go feud with somebody else. And so you weren't just seeing the same match over and over again. Unlike now where you're seeing the same match over and over again. And as I said, the characters aren't gray now. You know who you're supposed to root for. You know who you're supposed to root against. It's just, that pretty much covers the Attitude Era. True, it had some really fucking stupid characters, but it was drenched in realism ultimately. And that's what made it great. It was realistic. So, next week, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be one of the things I mentioned earlier. So, until then, go away.